Shackelford, could you please call the roll?
Recording in progress.
Yeah.
Recording in
Very good. All right. Supervisor Malik with Albemarle County.
Here.
Supervisor Galloway with Albemarle County. Mayor Snook with Charlottesville. Councilor Pinkstone with Charlottesville.
Here.
Mr. Nelson with VDOT.
Here.
Miss Laundry with VDOT.
Here.
Mr. Reek with Jaunt. Mr. Williams with Pat. Miss Monteith with UVA. Mr. Wagner with DRPT. Mr. Minor with FHWA. Mr. Koenig with FTA. Mr. Condor with CTAC.
Good morning.
All right, Ms. Jacobs with TJPDC.
Present.
All right, and just to go back, we were just joined by Mayor Snook with Charlottesville. Do you want to indicate your attendance?
I'm here. Belatedly, but I am.
We're pleased to have you, and Miss Monteith with UVA. So we do have quorum.
Fantastic. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to ask if there are any members of the public who would like to provide a comment. There's a limit of 3 minutes per speaker, and Sandy will keep the time. Is there anyone in the room who would like to? No? Okay. Anyone online? Okay, fantastic. So everyone should have a copy of the agenda either over here or emailed to you. So what I would ask, please, is for a motion and a second to adopt the agenda, unless somebody they'd like to add to it or have the question. Okay, second.
I assume that the times are not going to be.
Yeah, the times are offset from before to 10.
My apologies.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, anyone opposed? If not, okay, we'll move forward to that. And then we have the October 25th meeting minutes. Are there any revisions to the meeting minutes?
Move the approval.
Second, we have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? No, okay, so there we have it. We have an agenda and we have meeting minutes. Now, the next piece on the agenda has to do with officers for next year. This past year, I've had the honor of being chair and Supervisor Malik, vice chair, but we get to upset the apple cart, I guess, next year going into upset and just kind of change things up. The practice is to alternate chair, whoever holds the chair between the county and the city. And going forward next year, it would be someone from the county. First thing we need to do though is select a nominating committee to help us figure out who the potential nominees are. So I'm grateful that Ms. Monteith is willing to serve on the nominating committee. Thank you for that. And Mr. Nelson is looking to as well. The third person would be either Anne or Ned, we were thinking. Are you willing to serve on nominating committees?
What are the other options?
Okay.
I don't need to because he was given an IEP.
Okay. If the trouble is with you. It's
And
something
then during December is when this action will happen, because
correct.
sometimes there are changes in who will be the MPO person starting in January. So we might not have an answer until after that.
That's correct. Yeah, we'll have a new person coming on city council. Not sure how we did the goals yet in terms of, whether continuity with board meeting on this.
I don't know, that's like a first meeting in January.
Yeah, we won't have the same.
Yeah. So I think though at this point it's a safe bet. So, all right. Any questions about that?
No, to confirm, it doesn't preclude anybody on the nominating from serving as an officer.
Say that again.
It will not preclude anyone from the nominating committee as serving as an officer potentially.
So I'm sure Mr. Nelson is already kind of getting geared up. Just giving me a hard time right there. Okay, fantastic. So I think that takes us to our fifth item on the agenda, which is the transit governance study. This will be I guess an update where the PDCs in the final stages of completing the regional transit governance study. Dr. Stephanie Gangson, project manager of AECOM, has been joined for this morning by Zoom. Good morning. To provide an overview of the process and identify potential next steps for our region to pursue.
Hi, Stephanie, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you. Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, good morning.
All right, excellent. So thank you again for a chance to present an overview of the work that we've been doing over the past year. I think throughout the process, we've interacted with many of you in the room for this governance study. And so as we round up, we wanted to just summarize this and provide a means for continued engagement to continue to push this effort for setting up a transit authority. Now, this study has been in collaboration, like I said, with TJPDC and my AECOM colleagues, but we've also had continuous engagement from the City of Charlottesville, from the Albemarle County and DRPT in our engagement. So this work is really a part of a step-by-step process that has been taking place in the region. As far back as 2008, there were efforts to set up a transit authority, and that eventually ended up with setting up the Regional Transit Partnership that was formed to coordinate transit activities throughout the region. Following this, there have been other studies in looking at improving transit in the region. One of these studies was a Regional Transit Vision Plan, which concluded last year. And part of that was the development of networks that improve transit service throughout the region. One of those transit networks was developed with the assumption that, or with a recommendation of setting up some sort of entity that could provide for additional transit revenue to pay for those additional services that are recommended in the Transit Vision Plan. And so this study, this governance study, really is following up from the follow-up from the Transit Vision Plan. And throughout the study, we've had two main goals. The first is to identify governance options for regional transit. What could that possibly look like? And then two, identify potential funding mechanisms for increasing those transit funding. And so the approach we took was first to look at the existing conditions, including discussions with the existing operators and looking at the funding and governance structures of those entities. And then we conducted a peer analysis where we spoke with transit agencies, some of them were counties, but basically regions throughout the country that have similar characteristics to the Charlottesville region, meaning they have the urban core, they have some surrounding urban, suburban, or rural entities, as well as a major presence of a university. And so we summarize all of those lessons learned and use that to identify potential revenue generation options. Now, with this, we also looked at existing RTAs in the Commonwealth to see what precedence has been set and what could potentially be applied in the Charlottesville region. Finally, we looked at potential governance options, again, looking at the examples in Virginia as well as nationwide. as to develop these options. Again, throughout the study, like I mentioned in the beginning, we've had extensive stakeholder engagement, whether in a group setting or one-to-one setting. We've engaged with local, regional stakeholders, statewide representatives, as well as those from the national peers. And so as we wrap up this study, there were some findings that came up out of this study. So I'll just summarize those for us, and we can stop me with questions any time throughout the discussion. So the first was that we realized that throughout the study and our discussions with the localities, there is that desire for some form of regional governance. There's a desire for improving transit service throughout the region. And so what in terms of moving forward and keeping the momentum of this study, we are asking the localities and stakeholders to consider setting up an interim entity. It could be a work group or a working committee that can discuss details of what a transit authority could look like, as they also in the long term work toward presenting some sort of proposal to the state legislation to pursue transit funding, dedicated funding. And so what we are asking for this small committee of stakeholders to look like is a team that can work on first engaging the localities, developing draft organizational documents that can be reviewed by the localities and commented on, also pursue engagement with the university and the remaining stakeholders as well. And this committee can also begin to work on the details of what the RTA could look like in terms of cost sharing or administrative functions, and how those can shake out. Next, we also came to the understanding that there was a need for a rural transit assessment. In our discussion with the rural localities, something that kept coming up was the general need to understand what transit looks like for them in their localities. They wanted to know where their transit-dependent populations are located. They want to know what proportions of the residents are receiving service that is needed. They also wanted to find out what is the potential for added service for connections outside of Region 10. So some have some travel demand outside of their localities into neighboring counties. And so they wanted to further explore this. We understand that Jaunt is currently undertaking such a study. And so I think all the localities are keenly waiting for the results of that and looking to see how that can inform the next steps of this regional governance study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next, thank you. Next, there was a discussion of what perceived value in a regional approach could look like in terms of local control and having regional governance. Would the regional entity be able to serve local needs to the extent that is required? And so what we ask is for there to be continued engagement as the next steps continue to develop, even if there's a drafting of potential legislation or any kind of proposal that is taken to the state level. We think that the rural transit needs assessment would play a crucial role in this because based on the results of that, it can be evaluated against the transit vision networks that were presented in the previous study to identify and evaluate what needs can be added and what things need to be changed. There can also be accountability mechanisms. So when it comes to loss of control or getting benefits from any dollars that are invested with any entities that may have concerns, there are definitely accountability accountability mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that any kind of revenue that is generated is distributed in an equitable manner. Lastly, we wanted to also focus on collaboration with the university. Throughout the study, we did engage the university at some level, but we think that more discussion is needed to really narrow down on some of the details. One thing that we saw or we identified throughout the peer engagement with the regions across the country is that regardless of their governance type, whether they were an independent authority with taxing power, or they were a branch of a city department or a nonprofit or public transportation corporation, they all had a very close relationship with the university through either funding availability or some sort of contract arrangement. And so we definitely think there's room to explore a deeper partnership with UVA for the Charlottesville region. Part of that could come in many forms. We could, as discussions progress and details on what the regional solution could look like become clearer, there are ways to explore collaboration to leverage additional funding, whether it's grant funding, federal or state funding, looking at potential ways in which we can share costs for some functions, for example, whether it's admin functions or garage maintenance garages, training programs. There could be many options that could be explored, but then that needs to the university system and the regional entity can come to some sort of understanding. Another example that we saw in one of the peer cases was the university and the transit authority collaborating on innovative transit projects to get a lot of public support, as well as to be able to get additional funding in pursuing those efforts. And so those are some ways in which we think the university can be a strong partner for regional transit as we move forward. So after looking at all of these, we also, like I mentioned, wanted to identify potential revenue sources. To the left of the table, you're looking at our examples of revenue sources we identified that fund 3 of the transportation authorities in Virginia currently. They range from a sales tax to different types of taxes to other types of fees. We had a lot of discussion with representatives from those entities, MVTA, HR TAC, as well as VDOT and DRPT, to try to identify what is feasible for the Charlottesville region, considering existing conditions and also what the law would allow, current legislation would allow. And so to the right is a short list of some of the revenue sources that could be explored for the Charlottesville region. Now, looking at these sources, definitely if other options come up, those can also be explored as the study next steps continue. We also wanted to look at what an ideal structure could look like to govern this new funding that could be generated. And so currently there's existing legislation in the state law that allows for Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Transit Authority. However, the shortcoming of that legislation is it doesn't provide authority for funding. And so it could be, that legislation could either be modified or completely new legislation be presented to the General Assembly. But we think that the current structure of that is a good example of what the ideal solution could look like. And so the membership, board participation could be with the urban areas, Albemarle and Charlottesville, with the option for the surrounding localities to also participate if they choose to, and have this entity be governed by a board of elected officials. the details of the other responsibilities and other powers granted to this entity are detailed in the final report for this study as well. So in terms of the next steps for this work is for final reports to be reviewed by the localities, to continue discussions, and then an important next step is definitely to set up a small volunteer group to champion the next steps and continued efforts for this work. Thank you very much, and I can take any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I've read the report, and it just seems like at this point, we need to figure out what next steps are. I think we're fortunate that we have the CARTA in place. I know that there's some conversations happening with the university in terms of their ability to participate. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know how you feel, Lloyd, but it seems like a next step would simply be for county attorney and the city attorney to figure out how we activate this CARTA and figure out some bylaws for it, and at least get that going. Then we can come back later on and let that be sort of a working group, such that in a few months we maybe put something, ask our representatives to put something in front of the General Assembly or whatever to let us find out.
Exactly.
It seems to me like we talked about this a lot, and maybe it's time to just simply say, you know, let's get our attorneys together to figure out how we activate this authority that already exists. And I don't know, Lloyd, do you have any thoughts? Or
No, I'm fine with that. You know, saying we're gonna get the attorneys together, try to figure out what it would look like, doesn't commit us to anything in particular, but at least it gets us off the dime.
I agree. I think it's time to get off the dime. I mean, it's been a great study. This is something that's been talked about for a long time. We are fortunate that we do have that CARTA. There is an authority of some shape or form that already exists. So it seems to me that we I guess follow up with the county executive and the city manager and say, hey, what would it look like to at least get the city and county on board? Now, I don't know in terms of the rural side of things. I appreciate all the points that were made with the rural side of things. That seems to me like it's going to take a while, and I don't want to wait. I'm also not sure that there's the same sort of commitment on the side of their elected officials to do this as it would be on ours, but I don't want to prejudge that.
And my sense of things is, we know the essential pieces are Charlottesville, Albemarle. We expect, I personally think that the university is also an essential piece. Let's get that starting, let's get that going, start to think about it. And then we continue discussions with the rural counties to see what their level of interest is, what form their level of interest might take, how it might dovetail. I could imagine that we could decide that our transit authority under certain circumstances might not have them as members, but might have a contract with them separately or something like that. A lot of different ways it could go, but I think that you gotta get the city, county, and hopefully university all talking together first.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like I'm having a groundhog moment here, because what literally is required to activate, to stand up the authority instead of what the partnership has been doing? Because we have the same funding ability we had in 2008 when we got the authority legislation. I was there and got yelled out of the room when they told us they were not going to give us the money because we didn't build by. So
Because what?
Because you know, go home and build a bypass before you come back here to do that. So at least the 29 Solutions project put that issue to bed, thankfully. But I think the university over many years has made it very clear that city and county need to figure things out, and then they will become a partner. They're not going to get in the middle of this. And I think that's many different leaders and administrators, and that's fine. We just need to be the grown-ups here and get this squared away. So my original question is, is it the policy boards in each jurisdiction who need to say, yes, we're ready to go with this? Is it the MPO who's ready to go with this? What?
It's action on behalf of city council and the board of supervisors to activate the existing authority.
Okay, so we have the bylaws written in the partnership already. And my eyes get crossed when I think about starting all the way to the beginning again, any of this. We had the same taxing things in the transportation working group in 2005. So I mean, I just don't want to go back there again and go through and spend another many years going through all of that stuff. So the members need to get it on the board's agendas to talk about this and figure out with our individual attorneys what's to be done. Is that the next thing?
That's how we understand it. I mean, certainly it would come together. I don't think the bylaws of the RTP would be sufficient for the authority. It doesn't give them the same authorization that the RTA legislation gives them to be able to do regional transit planning, to be able to create, service standards, like all of the different things within an authority's authority, sorry, for the double use of the word, are very different than what the RTP's bylaws would look like. So there still would need to be work in developing a draft set of bylaws that the authority would operate under.
But we're not talking about a year's process. I would hope we're
I
talking
would not
about a
think so.
couple months process.
Correct.
Considering what both county and city attorneys already are working on, I don't worry about that. But there are also other bylaw sets for transit authorities.
Correct, we have those, we have drafts, that's exactly right.
The blank pages are empty here.
Yep.
And this was very successful in the workforce system to be able to just take the things that were on it and it can't be put our names in and change the things that we needed to change and we were done. No $10,000 per year.
What a next step we can ask the MPO staff to help coordinate a meeting with us and with Supervisor Galloway and the executives and the attorneys. Would that be like a next step to sort of move this forward?
I would suggest that each policy board or each board needs to affirm that that's what they want to do and then get together. I mean, we're here as representatives of our board and council. So we're not in a position to just go galvanizing off and do this on our own.
Right.
So I think an early January meeting that gets that squared away in each jurisdiction would be the first thing for that.
They'd like reaffirming that commitment to the CARTA.
And that, as part of the designation of who the MPO people will be, I mean, that's a good discussion. Then but
Are y'all able to give us something that we could like hand to our clerks and say, this is what we want to vote on?
We have the study and I think we could probably put together very high level next step of this is what we want to work on, like a sort of, these are the clear next steps that might make sense to pursue.
Is your question is your question to the attorneys at the localities or to the boards and council?
Well, we're not sure. To me, sooner or later, we're gonna have to get the attorneys and the executives together. But what Supervisor Malik is saying is we at least should take the result of this study and take it back to our respective boards and get them to sort of officially agree we want to take the next step, which sounds like reactivating CARTA or activating it for the first time with a goal of coming up with some bylaws and those kinds of things.
Correct. Correct. Yes.
What do you think, Lloyd?
Yeah, absolutely.
Says it needs an approving ordinance or resolution by each of the respected governing bodies.
Resolution would be something along the lines of affirming our commitment to CARTA and the desire to work out bylaws and. Okay. Do we need to take a vote on that here at the MPO today? You all feel like you have something to work with?
Yes.
Yeah. Then we can talk with, I guess, our team, we knocked it out with our team about. Good, wow.
Now, one caution, if we want this to be a public meeting versus not necessarily a public meeting with due notice and all that, we want to have it be a non-public meeting. It would probably should be one counselor and one supervisor. And whoever else as people who are not voting members of this body. Yeah. I think at least a first meeting should probably be sort of the non-voting, off the record kind of meeting. And then we can do some groundwork for it for the public.
I don't understand what you're talking about, but anyway.
I'm trying to avoid FOIA complications.
Well, I mean, you have a meeting or you don't, this is the public authority that's going to be done, so. Each jurisdiction can do things in their.
I'm
own
just
way.
trying to make sure we don't have more than 2 members of this body present in that meeting, because then it would have to be a public meeting.
That meeting, what, the jurisdiction.
what-
or the council?
Whatever,
Clarify where you're at the council level or at the new authority level.
Before it comes to council and the board, looking at a draft resolution, looking at draft bylaws, putting out what the next steps are gonna be, so that we can then hand something to you all to take to your board and council.
something we've already talked about at least once.
Okay, I just, I'll give you a draft that would come, but that's.
I do think it's, I mean, I think what Lloyd is saying, we just need to be thoughtful about the fact that even if it's just 2 members from each respective jurisdiction, it still would count as a public meeting for the others, our attorney. But what you're saying is that we just can get something draft and handle by email that we may not need to meet prior to the council and supervisors vote.
But you can send a draft to the chair and vice chair, who can then convey it to their attorneys and go from there. Otherwise, we're again meeting without anything to talk about.
It's a chair by chair, you can,
Again, that would cover the decision.
yeah, that makes sense. Love us people. Cool, fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that topic?
No, thank you, Stephanie, for being available today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good morning.
Okay, next step, next item up, smart scale program updates. Chapel.
Sure. Well, after months and months of considering what might happen, we finally have a decision from the CTB now. So the Commonwealth Transportation Board met on December 4th last week, and they made some formal votes on what the changes are going to be to the Smart Scale program in this upcoming round. So I'm going to review some of those. This is a summary of what happened, and then we're going to go through a couple of these points in a little bit more detail. So the first item for consideration was a change regarding how the congestion factor benefits were going to be calculated for Smart Scale scores. So currently, based on what happened in round 5, the projects were evaluated using a present year congestion factor. So looking at what delays were related to congestion currently. Historically, this has gone back and forth between using present day congestion factors and 10-year future congestion factor projections. At the so this was a debate that again resurfaced during the Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting. What they ended up voting on was approving the use of a 7-year future congestion factor. I think part of this was based on trying to reach a compromise because there wasn't clear consensus one way or the other, but I think they landed on 7 years basically because you have a year to get your project approved once you submit it through Smart Scale, and then it gets added to the end of the 6-year improvement program 6 years out. So you're using basically the projected future year that the project would begin being funded. And of course, we have lots of members from VDOT here today, so feel free to jump in and add anything or correct me if I misspeak. The second update that was under consideration was changing the way that the economic development measures were used to calculate the project scores. So if you recall, Currently, what we have been doing is staff uploads a lot of site plans that have been submitted in the vicinity of projects that are part of the applications. And what was being proposed was to move to uploading all of that information through a statewide database called Virginia Scans and pulling information from that database. And so that change was approved. So your staffs, both your transportation planning staff and your economic development staff, should all be aware of this at this point, and we'll be working to make sure that any sites that need to be considered for entry into the Virginia Scans database, if they're not doing so already, are prepared and aware that that's something that they need to be having those discussions about.
Sandy, what is the term again, Virginia, what?
Scans,
Scan.
and it's a database that's maintained through the, you know what it stands for, VEDP, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. Yeah. The third change was regarding the definition of the high priority program eligibility and elimination of the second step in how funding is awarded. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a separate slide, because there were changes that were approved, but those modifications that were approved were not what we had previously seen. So there were some last minute changes, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. And then you all recall that there was discussion around reducing the number of applications that each entity would have. They were talking about originally reducing it to 2, and then they developed this 3-tier application limit. All of the changes to changes in the application limit, that was all voted down. So the application limits that were previously held for the for all of the entities in our region are going to remain the same, meaning everybody that's eligible to submit smart scale projects will continue to be able to submit for applications.
But during that discussion, it was really pointing that we have to abide by the readiness. So in the future, if a project gets put into the portal and we deem it is not ready, just kick out. So that will be happening.
All right, probably the most complex of all of these is the land use factor weighting adjustment. So you recall that there was concern over the amount of the weightiness of the land use factor. It was termed a single factor majority. There were a lot of projects that were being funded based on their land use score, and there were some efforts to determine how they could better use the land use score to make that more in line with the other scoring factors. So the recommendation from the staff had been to turn that into a multiplier. What ended up happening at the CTB is that the CTB members voted to eliminate consideration for land use completely. There's a little asterisk beside that because there was strong concern from staff on multiple different levels that this violated the regulatory language in the state code. So it's possible that this may be revisited, but for right now, at least, land use is not a factor at all in the scoring process for smart scale projects. And I'll go through in another slide and describe how the points that had originally been allocated to land use are going to be reallocated.
Was there a large discussion about that?
There was, yes. It was a very interesting CTV meeting that you are all welcome to go watch.
What was the rationale for eliminating Sanders? I can't even figure it out.
We don't know.
One argument was that it's being considered, at least sort of to some extent, through the economic development and accessibility scoring factors, but I don't know that there was a clear reason that was articulated overall.
Are you discussing what is land use?
And is it indeed a requirement of the code section that it be?
So a giant factory goes in and all these people need to go there. That can't be related to an upcoming smart scale application for an intersection.
That
Can't think ahead is what they're saying.
that could be so that could be captured through the economic development score or through the accessibility score. Accessibility is measuring the ability of a project to improve access to jobs. What land use is trying to capture is, I think how it was referred to in the technical guide was transportation efficient land use, supporting transportation efficient land use, meaning if you have a place that has like a high residential population and has like a high number of what do they call them? Community destinations or attraction centers or something like that. So there's a lot of places that people will want to go to. There's like a high density of attractions that people would want to access. It's really kind of a factor of the density of development, helping connect people to be able to get to places where there's a lot of different activities.
That's why when projects really depending on where the location was at, that's why we got out of land use schools. That's why they were trying to make the change anyway to have a multiplier that would be a project could be fully funded, not to take. $40 what.
So what would come to mind in the old days in this circumstance was either Courthouse or Ballston in Arlington, which were transit demand zoning. They built high and very down, and nobody had cars, and they get on.
Mm-hmm.
None of that would have happened if there were not subway available, or could, well, it might have happened, but it would have been mitigated as opposed to having a very densely populated, very active area and people use the thing available. So how does that type of model get impacted by this change? It sounds like it's going to be not available.
Yeah, so a couple of examples of projects that got really high land use scores were, for example, the Avon Street multimodal improvements that the MPO had submitted in the previous round. So that was basically improving the bicycle and pedestrian connection from the city boundary where the bike lane stops to, getting, I think it didn't quite go to Wegmans, but getting to further down the road. I think it stopped across from where the transit center is, or where the storage units are, on Avon Road, a little past the bridge. So that was an example. Actually, the Fontaine Interchange project got a really high percentage of its points. I think it was something like 8 out of 10 of its overall benefit points came from land use, because there was a shared use path that was part of that interchange improvement. So that's where some of the projects are getting their funding right now. Even the District Avenue roundabout got a high number or high percentage of its points from land use, because that was in a high development area. So basically our projects just won't get those land use points right now unless there's further clarification on that in the future based on that decision.
That accessibility, is that limited strictly to jobs, or does it also go for healthcare? I mean, funding healthcare research park, anything like that, or is it just?
No, there are three.
So the three things are increase in access to jobs, increase in access to jobs for disadvantaged populations, increase in access to multimodal travel choices.
Oh, we can't put in.
And the no, that's a high priority program. There's still, this doesn't really limit what is eligible to receive funding through the district grant program, but the MPO is not eligible to submit projects through the district grant program. So correct. So this is the final definition or the final set of projects that were considered for, or that are going to be eligible for the high priority program through Smart Scale. And so the first thing that I want to mention is that the final definition, if you recall, the materials that we had reviewed previously had new bridges listed as a separate category, and there was not specification that this would only be highway bridges. And in the final information that was presented for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, that was that they voted affirmatively to approve, New Bridge is included under new capacity highway projects. And there was clarification at that meeting that the intention was that these would be bridges that had a highway component with them, so not a bicycle and pedestrian bridge. So the implication of that, of course, is that for the Ravenna River Bridge, that is likely not going to be a project that is eligible through the high priority program. And then the definition of projects for new or improved interchanges did not change significantly. There was some additional discussion about transit and freight improvements. And so one of the things that was specified is that this would include new or improved passenger rail stations or corridor improvements, basically related to freight and rail improvements. So, so a transit bridge, for example, or something like a dedicated lane for rapid bus transit could potentially be an eligible project through this transit and freight improvements definition. And then the last one that was added based on feedback that had been receiving is this last bullet right here, that is entire corridor improvements that are identified as the preferred alternative in a STAR study, a pipeline study, or an MPO study and that was completed in coordination with the state. So this is intended to take projects that come out of some of the VDOT supported project development processes, but maybe the hydraulic bundle would be a good example of this, because there's not one of those components that necessarily meets the definition otherwise, but there's a preferred alternative of a series of projects that would work together to improve operations. So submitting all of those projects bundled together as one application could be eligible under this definition. We have been working to get some clarification on what how the MPO study in coordination with the state would be defined to determine if the Ravenna Bridge might qualify under that definition. It is unlikely at that point. I think all signs are mostly pointing towards no, but until we see the final language, I think it'll be hard to have a definitive answer. Any questions on this?
Well, there's currently a pilot study for 250 cities out. So that would be what we're talking about.
I mean,
if there were improvements that were suggested from that.
well, I mean, I think that's
By that
affordable
bridge.
anywhere, but what this is saying is that if the locality did not want to potentially submit it for just a grant program, that the MPO could pick up the study and submit multiple projects on that corridor together as a high quality project.
Or maybe something.
I think it would have to be the entire set of recommendations as one project.
That could be.
Oh.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on this one? Okay. So, oh, go ahead.
Pipeline study is similar to what's being done at the 250 IV interchange.
Those are pipeline studies.
And those are separate pipeline studies.
Those are done,
There's-
initiated by
there's-
VDOT.
There's one, and then there's the 254, so there's two. They're being.
Are they kind of clumped under a larger effort, or are they two separate? This is saying the piece in yellow is that we could somehow take those as the basis to do actual work at some point.
We would basically, so if there's a total corridor study, what they don't want us to do is to submit individual components or individual projects out of those corridor studies that isn't a new capacity highway or a new or improved interchange. We wouldn't be eligible to submit those. But if there's a series of projects that are identified out of that plan as a preferred alternative, so the preferred alternative that comes out of one of those pipeline studies is to do maybe 3 different things. And none of those meet the definition individually, but there are 3 things that are recommended that would work together that come out as a preferred alternative in those pipeline studies. That set of 3 projects could be an application for the MPO to submit.
Let's say it was an access management where you're just going to be changing a whole lot of access to a bunch of parcels to help with throughput on the corridor. That likely would not be eligible for high priority, but if you bundle it all together under this definition, it would.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so the factor weighting modifications, this was also a pretty interesting discussion at the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So as you recall, what happened is that when there was a recommendation to remove land use as a standalone scoring factor, there's a question about where should the points that were previously going towards land use be allocated. So this table shows what was finally approved by the CTB. What was interesting about this is that there was the recommendation that was developed by the OIP staff. During the meeting, there was a question asked to the commissioner directly of what his recommendation was going to be. And then in some places there was a recommendation that was developed by CTB members themselves. And a little bit of all of that ended up getting approved as part of this process. So for area types C and D, the staff recommended scenario was approved. So whatever points were currently coming from land use got reallocated to a combination of safety and congestion. For area type A, this was a recommendation from a CTB member. And then the MPO, so the urbanized areas are in type B. This was actually the recommendation from the commissioner. So the points that were going to land use were reallocated to a combination of congestion and accessibility. We did not get additional points added to safety in our region. There's some discussion about why that was from the commissioner, but this is going to be the final weighting scenario that we're assuming will be for our area. And then for the non-urbanized areas of Albemarle County, you would fall under type C.
Okay.
All right, so that's where our scores for SMART scale are going to be coming from in round 6. Any other questions on this one? Okay. So with all that said, now that we better understand what the eligibility criteria is going to be for high priority program projects, this is to the best of my knowledge and after some consultation with Chuck, this is what we think the final list of projects that we could consider as the MPO for submission could be. So we are looking at as we discussed at the last meeting, the diverging diamond interchange or another interchange improvement at I-64 and 5th Street. We could go back and reconsider a southern extension of Hillsdale that would connect from basically the Hillsdale roundabout near not Wegmans, Whole Foods down to 250. And then we did complete 2 pipeline studies on round 5 that we submitted these as 4 individual applications, but we could bundle these together and submit them as 1 application each. So one for Peter Jefferson Parkway and Rolkin Road, which actually scored pretty well in the previous SMART scale application cycle. And then there was another one that was a bundle of projects from Louisa Road and Milton Road, a little bit further east into Shadwell. And then we have the 2 pipeline projects that are currently underway. Keeping in mind that the MPO could potentially submit 4 projects, we don't have to submit 4, and that the TJPDC will also have 4 application slots. So we do have a little bit of time on the agenda today. We don't necessarily need to discuss these in detail, but we can if you all would like to, understanding that the pre-applications are going to need to be submitted in March. So any questions?
Looking for see if still looking forward with these or additional ones. Well,
I don't know that we're going to be able to pursue additional ones, but I think if you all have feedback on this potential projects, otherwise we're going to need to get clearer direction from you all in January.
Hope that the jurisdictions will gather together individually, just to make sure that we get square city and county first. But one thing I think I would hope both jurisdictions would make sure of is that before we put an application in, there are no impediments, business right of way, willingness or whatever to go back to something that has been sitting for 10 years. That's a real concern. And the second part is, are we better off having 1 sensational project or 2 or 3 not so much?
Sure.
And I don't know this.
Ben, do you have any? I do not see any feedback to this or thoughts.
I think Councilman or Supervisor Alex comments were on the spot. We're talking to VDOT right now about what we're doing in terms of city specific projects. And then once we figure out what we can apply for through that, we'll have more to say about sort of the regional.
So are we talking with the county? I guess it's something where you guys are police.
We're always kind of talking about that. Yeah.
So are you wanting at the MPO meeting in January for them to do a presentation or where are we?
I don't know that we need to do a presentation, but we will need to give guidance to VDOT on which projects we're going to want to move forward with, because they're also going to need to make sure that they can support the development of any materials that will need to be updated for these applications.
Okay.
The other thing I'll just mention briefly is obviously the Ravenna River Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge is most likely not going to be something that the MPO can submit. It could still be an eligible project if the resounding opinion is still that the location that was identified as the preferred location, Albemarle County could submit that as a project.
And we don't get special treatment if we submitted it under a previous dispensation and the dispensation changed and then it starts from scratch. So that happens.
Yeah.
$49 thing.
Unfortunately, I don't know if this is good news or bad news. Under the new rules, it would actually be pretty competitive if it would have been funded.
If Albemarle had submitted, you mean?
No,
No.
What do you say that again?
It showed, like, during the CTV meeting, it came out that the bridges were specifically for vehicular traffic.
Oh, yeah.
Not just pedestrian bridges. So in everything that we had seen prior to, in the scenario that we're running, this
Would have
project
been,
was being changed to be funded in the scenario. So if we had played by the rules that were just, that staff recommended rules, where the bridge potentially had been a pedestrian bridge and it was eligible for high priority, under the round that we just went through, it would have been funded. That makes sense.
but now bridges need to
But
also
they
have a
clarified
vehicular
that it
component.
states that it cannot just be pedestrian bridges. Now that it can't be just pedestrian bridges, it's automatically picked up.
that
High priority.
from hybrid, that said, the benefits wouldn't have changed whether or not it was eligible for the high priority. So the point is really that it would actually be a competitive project through Smart Scale at this point.
Even though it's going to supposedly take a lot of cars off the road, if people can live in one side and work on the other side. walk around, bike around.
Right, it's just not eligible for high priority. The overall score could be competitive through the district grant program if one of the localities wanted to pick it up.
What's that last sentence? MPO policy for preferred project can be submitted by Albemarle County.
That's for the bridge specifically. So the alignment that you all had indicated was your preferred alignment for that bridge is entirely within Albemarle County.
So I guess
So they would have to be the applicant under the DGP.
it remains to be seen if that will be something that you all decide. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Any other questions or comments on this at this point?
I guess you have a process or some sort of timeline, or is there something we need to do to help drive these? So we have until March to make applications?
Yeah, the pre-applications will need to be developed in March, so we'll need. I mean, I think at this point it's gonna be a time crunch regardless, because normally, but what we had tried to do in the last round was make these selections like by September or October. So,
Things got kind of
Yeah.
dragged out.
yeah, we had to wait until we knew what the new rules were going to be. So I think in January, we probably need to have a pretty good sense of what we want to move forward on.
Well, by January, we should know a little bit more about city and county's priorities and also the pipeline projects and whether or not they'll be to a point yet where there's a set of recommended projects.
And is that coming through the MPO tech committee? Is that part of this whole thing? Or
The pipeline projects are actually initiated by VDOT. So that's,
like the whole sort of managing a list, is that coming through?
Yeah, we could.
they're reviewing all of these.
Yeah, we're reviewing all of this. We can ask them to make some recommendations at their next meeting to forward up to you all for consideration.
When is their next meeting?
The third Tuesday of January.
Okay, well, I don't know, it seems to me like there's a lot of stuff that we're gonna get some more work done with round 6. There needs to be some pushing that someone needs to do. I don't know if it comes from you all doing the pushing or.
But we'll work with the staffs of the localities to sort of see what might be making sense.
And all the localities have already been engaged, and just started engaging months ago regarding smart scale for round 6, so that ball's already working.
Okay.
I'm just concerned about what we're gonna end up doing in January, recognizing what seems to be a rather tight timeline. And I'm wondering what, for example, what council, as council, is going to be called upon to decide before next steps happen. Because anyway, we have, both of our meetings in January are on Tuesdays, first and the third Tuesdays. If you're talking about an MPO meeting where something is to be decided on the third Tuesday, I don't know whether we have something's got to come before something else kind of problem for that day, or whether we have a direct conflict in times, or.
Well, I think the third Tuesday was the MPO tech committee. So then, MPO meeting will be before that or after that?
The MPO meeting will be after that. So MPO tech might happen the same day as the council meeting, but the policy board will meet the next week. So if there's additional information that comes out of that discussion at council, we could consider that. Maybe it would help to walk back a little bit though. In March, we are submitting our pre-applications, which means basically we're saying this is what we are intending to submit full applications for. We don't necessarily need resolutions of support from the localities at that point. We won't submit final applications till August. So that's when we would need to have everything finalized in place. But in order to be able to submit those final applications, we would have to submit those projects for pre-applications in March. So we can always remove a project after that if needed. But
The crunch that I was fearing in January is not really a thing.
I think to the extent that we can provide clear information to VDOT to help develop the applications, that's helpful, but there will still be opportunity to change our minds and to finalize details and things like that,
But
so.
if there's a showstopper or something that you all
You
know
know.
is not going to be
Mhm.
able to move forward, we don't want to spend staff time working on an application that is going to go nowhere.
So how do we get that? In what form do we get what information to take to whom to give that kind of a resolution?
I think on our side, it's Mr. Chambers will be working with
Okay,
Stephen Hicks and, yeah, and Sam Sanders to figure out what our tranche of projects is, and that seems something similar would happen on the county side. And it sounds like they're already on the case.
good.
So VDOT can just wait until we get requests. I mean, it seems unfair to think that you're supposedly working on all the stuff that the jurisdictions are not prioritizing. So hopefully you can do your stuff. That's fine.
Oh, yeah, we're not.
Temporarily, don't go church it down.
We've got a project selection process that we've been working through with localities on projects that they're thinking about putting in for, so.
Very good.
But we are initiating the study, so that is history interchange, that one is at the list. Right, and any others that we get an indication, especially if it's a repeat application, if there's an indication that it's likely to move forward, we can start to do something.
So I think that in the presentation that Jeff made to the board last fall, that was super hyper, yeah, really dangerous. In all directions.
Third bullet point, TJPDC will also be able to submit for eligible projects.
Mhm.
Are you guys thinking about what this might be, or?
Typically, we will do a call out to all of the localities to determine who might have projects that they would like to have us submit on behalf of the TJPDC. That said, with these changes to the high priority program definition, there's probably going to be a very limited number of those applications that we're not already aware of. I don't know of any outside of these projects that would be eligible throughout our greater region.
So I got confused at the minute about who carries the pipeline projects through the application process. Is that something VDOT does because you identified the solution, or is it one of the jurisdictions that has to?
We can't.
VDOT cannot apply.
We can't do it, so it has to be one of us.
Mhm. So the MPO can apply for eligible, or the localities can as well.
We're also in a unique situation because so many projects were previously funded that our list is not extensive anymore.
Yeah.
And so when we say we have an additional 4 slots for the PDC, we may not have 4 projects that are ready to be submitted because of how many were previously funded. And in the past, we would have had, 4 for the MPO, 4 for the PDC, 4 for each local jurisdiction.
We had such a dry spell for 20 years.
All right, is there any other questions on this particular topic, about smart scale? Okay, I guess we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the VDOT project pipeline updates from Mr. Proctor.
Yeah, I'm online. I can give that presentation. I had a meeting with the consultant that's doing those projects this morning. We're starting the alternative development phase. I actually reviewed the project forecast for each project and have given them approval on those. And they are moving forward with developing alternatives for the Barracks Road study. We're looking to have the stakeholders group meeting in early January and possibly go out for public comment on the alternatives, various alternatives later in January. And so we can basically get feedback from them and then select a final preferred alternative in February. Ivy Road is, because it's got a lot more pieces to it, it's going to take a little bit longer. We're looking at those meetings probably late January, early February, and then going out to public comment in February. And then hopefully we'll know something before March. And that's basically where we're at with those projects. I wanted to chime in on the other stuff that you guys were talking about previously. As Sandy pointed out, we're doing the 5th Street interchange study for the MPO. I've got a consultant that's working on that, and I've given them the go ahead and the task orders. So they are actually collecting data and doing the initial alternatives analysis on existing conditions, collection that data and processing that. And then we will be bringing that to the group, probably the policy board and the different MPO committees, possibly in January, for their evaluation, and then we'll be coordinating going out to the public probably end of January, early February for the various alternatives. That's going to include coordination with the central office and FHWA because it is on the interstate. So there's a lot of stuff happening regarding that study, and hopefully we'll have some good things to present to you possibly in January, but definitely in February.
Great, thank you very much. Is there a way on the pipeline studies, particularly the one, or really for both of the ones, that one at 250 and also at Barracks, is there like a project website or something that shows the options that y'all are working through?
We don't have those. We just came up with some various alternatives that they're going to start to look at, but I don't have anything other than a list. And I'll have to check to see if it's even posted on the website. It was part of the task order that we issued for the consultant to actually start to look at these alternatives. We will have a meeting with the internal meeting, and we'll be meeting with the stakeholders group, like I said, early January. And then we'll also have to be meeting with the county's got the citizens group that they're coordinating with. We will be taking it out to them too, as well as the public survey in January. But probably not, we probably won't have anything definite for you guys to look at until early January on Barracks Road. Ivy Road is probably going to be closer to February, maybe the end of January.
Is it possible for our next MPO meeting to just have an update on those?
Potentially, there's a lot on our next MPO meeting, so I think either January or maybe February, but we'll try to work it into our agenda as soon as possible to have a more substantive.
See what those options
Yeah.
are. Something I think would be interesting. The one at 250, are we making sure to include the university in those conversations in terms of stakeholders?
Correct. Yes.
Because there's a lot of university land there. There's got the railroad tracks. It's really a dicey kind of place to try to build anything.
working with the city and the county and the university on that project, as well as the county's coordinating a stakeholders group of the community members in that area also.
Yeah, without prejudging anything, I know that there will be pressure from certain stakeholders to not want anything on their front yards, I don't say backyards, but I hope we'll look at all the possibilities with as much objectivity as possible. So.
That one may take longer. Like I said, it's probably going to be on a longer time frame than the other study at Barracks Road. And that's why I said it's probably going to be February timeframe for that one, and March for the public outreach, or end of February, early March for the public outreach, and the citizens meetings. Barracks we're trying to get that one in January. And then once we go through that process, we'll see the feedback we get, and then we can make a determination at that point what the preferred alternatives are, and then do we want to, or can we decide on a preferred alternative without having some additional meetings? We'll have to see what that plays out when we get to that point in February.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else on?
Before Chuck disappears, for your consultants who were working on the DDI at Fifth Street and 64, are they out there on the ground at commuter time and seeing what's happening, or do they need photographs of how far it backs up into the travel lanes and things like that every day? I mean, what do you need to complete that work?
They're getting counts. They're supposed to get counts. Probably they might be getting counts right now. We got the task order issued, I want to say in November. It's just whether they were able to get the counts before Thanksgiving or not. I'd have to ask to see for sure when they got counts. But yes, we will be getting data from the peak hours, time of the day. Probably I think they're getting 12-hour counts through that corridor. So we will have a lot of information so we can look at the various alternatives and then see how they're going to work and which would function the best. And then we'll be bringing those various alternatives to the committees to review. And then we'll be like I said, we'll also be going out for a public survey on the various alternatives to get feedback from the public.
And I don't know how sophisticated your wires on the road for counting are, but I think that what is alarming to people is the fact that all the people turning left across north-south traffic to get on 64 in either direction stack up in the travel lane, and when you in all directions. And so that is a really scary thing when you're sitting in traffic and somebody races up behind you at 55 and has to screech on the brakes because they don't know that you're standing. And the same thing at the pipeline at Ivy Road, when that Ivy Road exit traffic backs up with all the people trying to go west on 250, and that backs up into the bypass. So that's why I thought a visual might be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor. I think we're
Yes.
on the moving toward 2050 updates, which is Sandy.
Yeah. So just want to let you know that we are still moving along on everything with our long range transportation plan. There are a couple things that I'm going to bring to your attention, and there are links to the full maps that were included in your it's included in the memo. The links are included on the memos, but we were able to complete our first runs of the travel demand model outputs, and so I'm going to go through those outputs originally. So just to remind you all, the travel demand model takes input on, it breaks the entire region up into these smaller geographic areas called travel analysis zones, or TAZs. And basically we are able to program in different socioeconomic data related to populations, numbers of jobs, numbers of school-age children, numbers of households or households without vehicles, those kinds of things. And it helps us understand what the impact is over our transportation network. And so to help us understand, the purpose of this is to help us understand what the current volume over capacity of our current network looks like now using baseline data, and then projecting out to a future year. So we're using 2050 for this plan to help us understand that based on the current growth projections, what the network would look like if we didn't build any new infrastructure. So right now we are only comparing our baseline conditions and our future no build conditions. What will happen is that once we have identified preferred projects that we would like to move forward with, we can again model our future no build or our future network, taking into account what the selected projects would be to see if there's an impact on the volume over capacity for the network. So we don't have preferred projects. We're just looking at what the network looks like now and what it would look like in 2050 if there was no change. So in order to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples, what I did was we got the volume over capacity outputs from the modeling team with VDOT, and I converted these to use basically the level of service ranges. So you'll see there's A, B, C, D, E, and F. What I did on the maps was I combined E and F for no other reason other than I had 5 ranges, and adding a 6th range was a little bit beyond my technical capacity. So if something is bright red, it's E or F, which means that the network is either at capacity or is projected to be over capacity. So I thought those were the ones that we would want to pay attention to anyway. All right. So I'll just go through a couple of areas to highlight a little bit more detail. But again, all the maps, the full detailed maps and higher resolution, thanks to Ruth's GIS capabilities, are available if you want to take a closer look. So the first one is looking at the Garth Road, Ivy Road area on the right-hand side. At the right-hand side is the current baseline conditions. And then on the left-hand side, these are the future no build conditions. You can see that this Garth Road area goes from yellow basically to red and orange. So yellow is kind of that middle range. The level of service is C or D. That's when you kind of start looking like maybe there could be some issues in the future. And turns out in 2050, if there are no improvements there based on the growth projections, it would start to reach the roadway would start to reach its capacity. You can also see a little bit right here. This is like I guess where 250 and 29 come together right here. Starts to get a little bit more red in that area. We can look at downtown Charlottesville. You can see that this 250 bypass gets a lot darker. Again, the 2021 conditions are on the top, 2050 conditions are on the bottom. You can see that much more that there's already some capacity issues at the top here in the top scenario, and then it gets redder as we move into 2050. And then this area along 250 kind of not actually related to Freebridge as much, but on both sides of Freebridge, it continues to experience some volume over capacity issues. And there's also, I thought it was interesting to look at these networks downtown that are starting to, more of the smaller road systems in downtown are starting to light up. And then along North 29, one interesting thing that I noticed along North 29 is the section of North 29 north of Polo Grounds Road. In the current scenario is showing these red and orange spots. And then if you move to 2050, those look like they're moving to Polo Grounds Drive. So again, this basically gives us an opportunity to understand the congestion considerations and the demand on the roadway networks, but these will come out a little bit later once we have some preferred projects that we would like to move forward with, but just wanted to pass those along to you, give you an opportunity to look at those in case it's something that's of interest, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have at this point.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you're ready to move on, I can keep
Yeah.
going. Okay. All right, the needs prioritization, as you recall, we've been working through, starting with looking at what the overall network needs are. And then once we get to complete this analysis, we will be able to move forward to start matching our needs against projects. And that will help us narrow down our project priority list. We are hoping to have a first screening of those to you in January. But so far we have worked through two of our sets of metrics, and then we should be able to finish the last sets of metrics this month. We started with the hardest ones, and so the other ones should be a little bit easier and more efficient to get through. So completed to date, we have the bicycle and pedestrian safety needs prioritization completed. We have the multimodal accessibility for our form measures completed. We're very close to finishing the roadway safety. And then we have started to look at the efficiency and economic development measures and the land use coordination. So again, there is data that is, there were maps that were included as a link. So you're welcome to go through and look at any of these in more detail. A couple of caveats is that I'm going to go through and demonstrate the data that we have developed to date, showing basically what each of these metrics looks like individually. I do want to caution, though, that our intention is not to consider these as individual metrics, but to consider the cumulative impact. So I think it's helpful to look at the metrics because they help us understand the data and make sure that it makes sense, but I don't want to put too much emphasis on looking at any one particular metric by itself. So the first metric that you'll recall is looking at the bicycle and pedestrian safety. This is basically taking the top 5%. We ended up using regional corridors versus statewide corridors because the way that the information that was developed for the network was different in regional versus statewide. And if we use the top 1% of the regional corridors versus the top 5% of statewide corridors, there were actually links that were missing. So to make sure we are capturing all of the geographic area that had been identified as wanting to be considered by the policy board, we included the top 5% of regional corridors. So this is looking at the darker segments are showing that this is where there is, these are the highest bicycle and pedestrian safety needs based on using that network as our starting point to determine the needs. So this is the 29 corridor, this is 250 and Pan Paps near Free Bridge, and then along 5th Street. Okay. Then moving into our access to jobs, if you'll recall, what this is measuring is it's measuring where people are coming from and where there are opportunities to improve the number of jobs that people can access. So what is being sort of captured right here is the origin of where people are coming from, where there's an opportunity to improve access to jobs. So these are the census blocks basically where we can improve access to jobs for these people. It's not capturing where people are going. So if we're looking at bicycle access to jobs, you'll see there's a lot of potential for improving access maybe outside of the city center. So you look at the urban center, there's good access to jobs by bicycle right now. The biggest opportunities for improving access are for people that are living a little bit further out. If you're looking at auto access to jobs, this is measuring the difference between how long it takes people basically, it's measuring the number of jobs people could access within a specified period of time, comparing the difference between how long it takes people, how many jobs people can access now versus how many they could access if the network was operating at off-peak hour conditions. So you'll see that the biggest, if we use a threshold of 25 minutes, this is how many jobs people can access now by car versus how many they could access if they were able to reach the entire, the same number, or yeah, versus off-peak conditions. So you can see again that the biggest opportunities are out here in Crozet, in this northwestern portion of Albemarle County. We tried a couple of different time evaluations right here. We started with 45 minutes, and I'll show you that as well. But I think what we realized is that our MPO region is pretty small, that 45 minutes may be too high of a number. And so we tried this alternative using 25 minutes, which felt a little bit more reasonable. And one of the justifications for using 25 minutes is this is actually the statewide average commute time. So we felt like that probably gave us a better indication of what the reasonable opportunity to improve access to jobs was using vehicles. And then we looked at the accessibility improvements for transit access to jobs. So what this is measuring is how long it takes people who are currently using transit to get to jobs and how many more jobs they would be able to access if transit ran as efficiently as automobiles. So this also includes trip chaining events. So if somebody is getting into a car and driving to a transit station and then getting onto not a train, sorry, a bus stop, and then getting onto a bus, it includes that full range of all of those activities associated with taking the bus. So you'll see that in some places there are trips that are originating where we know that there's not a bus stop, but it includes any other activity that that goes into getting onto a bus. And so again, you'll see that a lot of the opportunities tend to be outside of the urban center and are more on the further away portions of the MPO area. And then the last one is looking at the transit access to jobs by disadvantaged populations. And so this is looking at the equity emphasis areas, which is a composite score that is determined in the statewide transportation plan, looking at where there are vulnerable or disadvantaged populations based on things like households without vehicles, non-English speaking, people who are over a certain age, etc. So this is looking at if there's an equity emphasis area that already has transit access, what's going to light up is where there is an opportunity to improve their access to jobs. So it's only so it's taking a much smaller starting demographic compared to the other one. So again, each of these individually tells part of a story, but when we put them together, and I think the transit access to jobs is pretty interesting, is if you're looking at the region as a whole and the population generally, there's a lot of opportunity to increase transit access for people on the outside parts of the MPO versus if you're looking specifically at disadvantaged populations, the opportunity is much more focused on improvements to the urban centers. So again, the data is available for your review if you'd like to look at it more closely. Just wanted to make sure that you all were aware as we continue to work through this, and again, answer any questions you all may have.
Any questions?
It's really important to read the legend.
Yes.
The need is what's high as opposed to the availability, which is.
Yes.
Just look at this diversion. People don't have transit at all.
Yep.
Right. Here.
Yep. So we'll continue to work on this and update you all with data as it becomes available.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we're ready to move to the staff updates portion of the meeting.
Yeah, so I will kick this off real briefly. We did receive the notice of funding opportunity for the next round of RAISE grants. So they're currently, the application portal is currently open. Those are due at the same time next year, February 28th, 2024. We are prepared. It sounded like there was general interest in continuing to pursue a RAISE grant for the Ravenna River Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. We are certainly prepared to resubmit that scope, maybe with some modifications to the application itself. It did, if you recall, it did score very well, and it was considered to be a competitive project through the RAISE grant. But
Federal money?
This is federal money, and
Would it fund the whole thing, or?
what the application we submitted was to complete the preliminary engineering phase of the project, and the goal of doing that would be that we would have a better estimate for the construction costs at that point. And then I think there are a couple of different options that we could move forward with if we were successful in getting that RAISE grant. The first one is that we could apply for another RAISE grant to do the construction of the bridge once we have a cost estimate. The second option is that if one of the localities wanted to submit the application through Smart Scale for the RAISE grant and that was successful, we could leverage the funding that we received through the RAISE grant against that application. So we could pay for the PE phase of that application or of the Smart Scale project through the RAISE grant, which would reduce the cost that we would have to submit as the Smart Scale application overall. The third scenario is that maybe it's not successful through Smart Scale or an applicant doesn't want to move forward with Smart Scale. We would have more information to inform a future Smart Scale application at that point.
Seems like a no-brainer to apply, and at least for the early engineering piece.
No, I agree, and it will improve our possibilities for the next round or something if we put that into the pre-plan.
Great.
Free Lloyd, anyone else?
Nothing to add.
Cool.
Great.
When will that happen?
Yeah, so I'll start working on it now. Hopefully it won't be nearly as much of a lift as it was previously. To update that, we'll coordinate with VDOT on updating all of our cost estimates, but I'll probably come back in January to ask you for a more formal resolution support. The applications will be due February 28th, and I did not confirm this, but I think I did confirm this, that they should notices of funding awards should be made by June of 2024.
It'll also go before the TJPDC commission in February, because technically the PDC will be the applicant.
Okay.
So you guys would be making a recommendation to the PDC to apply.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right, next, safe streets and roads for all.
That'll be, so as you probably heard, the TJPDC was awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant to develop a safety action plan for the region and its jurisdictions. And this plan would identify opportunities to eliminate fatalities and reduce serious injuries on the roadway network. So we retained a consultant, Union Board, to assist in this process, and we are just now getting things really underway. We have the first working group session with professional staff from all of the jurisdictions this Thursday. And we have a regional safety summit scheduled for January 10th. So come to that if you can. And that's all.
Interesting. So what do you think, what will be sort of the output from this? There will be a study done, and what the deliverables look like?
So one important thing to combine with this is once we do this plan, we will have specific projects for each jurisdiction that we would then be eligible to get additional funding for.
Okay.
Well, we'd be eligible to apply for very competitive funding for.
Yes, but if you don't have a plan, you can't even, you're not
Correct.
eligible to
You
apply.
must have a safety action plan
This is
adopted.
a federal thing or state or?
Yes.
US DOT Safe Streets and Roads for All, they have both planning and implementation funding.
So it opens up an additional potential out for funding.
Got it. Any other questions on that? All right, upcoming tip modifications.
Yeah, I just want to put it on your radar now that I will be coming to you all in January with some substantive changes to our tip document. One of the things that we've realized when looking at this tip document just recently is that since 2015, we have included John's expenditures, scheduled spending, and we've just realized that John is not a direct recipient of federal funding. So they actually do not need to be considered and included in our tip. Their funding is captured through the state and through CAT's basically operating expenses, since the funding that Jaunt receives to operate in the city is in providing the paratransit services in CAT. And so we are going to be updating the document to be consistent with the basically the state spending schedule and removing all of those references. There are also some other small changes related to additional funding that was provided to CAT for some of their additional studies that we'll be making, but we'll wait until January to update all of those at one time. But it will be a significant number of modifications that you all will see in January. The Transportation Improvement Program. So it is that schedule, it is the expenditure, it's a schedule of federal expenditures and within our MPO area.
And that was in the packet, all of those charts towards the end.
Correct. We're hoping to simplify the document a little bit to streamline any sort of action that you all have to take on it in the future.
Do both the transit agencies you just mentioned report to somebody about all of these studies that they're doing, that things that you're taking out of our reporting system? Where does that information actually show up?
Yeah, the state maintains a statewide transportation improvement program. So those would be through the state's
So
reporting.
DOT would have all the things that Kat and John are
Yeah,
doing that we were talking about, but we're not.
right. And all of CAT's scheduled spending will stay in our tip because they're within the urbanized area. John actually does not receive any money to operate in the urbanized area other than what is passed through CAT. Yeah.
Okay,
So is this basically like the,
well, I was just saying, or where the county is supporting rural routes in the urban area.
But that wouldn't be federal funding.
John thinks that they have to provide within the quarter mile of that. So
Yeah, but that is either not federal funding or it is still funded through rural transportation operation expenses, which is under the state's which is under the state's allocation.
okay, well, that's it showing up somewhere.
Yes,
And if one wanted to know, you would be able to find it.
understood.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
okay, any other questions on that? Right, the final thing under staff updates, annual obligations report.
Yes, this was included in your document. So the tip tells us what funding is going to be scheduled. The annual obligations report tells us what funding was actually spent on in the previous year. So that one has been prepared and has been provided to you all for review. It's also been posted on our website.
There's no vote that's required.
There's no vote. We just need to make sure we provide notification to you all.
And the print is really, really.
Oh.
It's designed for an 11 by 17 piece of paper. Oh,
This is basically what the MPO is keeping a ledger of all the various expenses.
Yeah.
Is it for any federal money that flows through, whether it's going to the city or county?
It's for money that, oh, I don't know, Stacy, you might have to answer this for me.
So this is a report of, most of it is VDOT's decisions on how to use the federal allocations we have to pay for the projects
Okay.
that we're doing throughout the area. And there's a report like this that's for each MPO. statewide. So it doesn't, these are the behind the scenes decisions on, which colors of money, which fiscal year they're using to pay for which projects.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're at our last item here, roundtable updates. We'll start with our friends at VDOT. Who can you group?
Sure, we've got a public hearing scheduled for December 12th, which is tomorrow, for the Fifth Street Station Trail. Which is an MPO submitted project. So it's going to be at the Albemarle County Fifth Street Office Building. That project right now is currently scheduled to start construction in spring of 2025. I would also want to give this board an update regarding the Fontaine Avenue project. I guess over the last 6 months, we started to hear concerns regarding the project that was submitted by the MPO in round 4, which is in 2020. Those conversations revolved around concerns that the part of the project fixes the northbound 29 movement to westbound 64. By removing the left and diverting all the traffic to Fontaine to circle back around to come back down 29 south to go westbound on 64. There were concerns about that movement, so the department took heed to those concerns of the various stakeholders, and we've looked at various alternatives to address the concerns. But the one thing, when we looked at these alternatives, the one thing that's taken out of the improvements at the interchange. So any alternative that we're looking at does not fix the issues of the left going 64 westbound. So my goal is to come back to this board in January to go over what those concerns are, look at the various options that we've come up with to address those concerns, Because ultimately, this board is gonna have to tell me if we're gonna proceed the project as is, or we're gonna go an alternate route. There's positives and negatives to doing both.
Could you, Sean? Send out some preliminary information, like. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I know Jim, what you're talking about, but if there's anything you can send out. You know, prior to Christmas, to let's start.
Yes, we can send.
And if you is this affecting university land at all?
Yes.
Yeah, back to
Yeah, so we'll need to make sure you all have had a chance.
Yeah.
You're already thinking of it.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all I'll say.
Only thing I'll add is we've had some staffing changes. Michael Barnes is leaving us, has left us, and is moving over to the position with the county. So we're excited for him and glad that we're gonna be able to continue to work with him. That leaves Chuck and I with his position vacant, and then also we have another position in planning that we're actually gonna be interviewing for this week. So hopefully we will have a more junior level planner joining us, and then be able to fill Michael's seat, which is the senior planner. That recruitment should be posted this week, so we'll close sometime around end of the year, and we'll be hopefully interviewing and finding somebody to onboard in January.
So if you know anybody, tell them.
Thank you. What's on the county?
Just to assure you all, we are working on thinking about smart scale projects. We're in the next round. We've been having internal discussions, keeping the city, the MPO, and MDOT in the loop. And we'll have an initial list of our projects in our transportation quarterly report to the board of supervisors in January. We've also been working on our budget process for the next fiscal year, and we're kind of in the boring middle of a lot of different projects. We'll be coming back to the board of supervisors in spring of next year to talk about the Albemarle County Transportation Priorities document. We're in the middle of the Free Bridge Lane Promenade pilot program, planning for that. And we found out for our 3-notch trails raise grant award, we finally passed legal review for federal government. So we have some minor changes to make to the grant agreement. Once we resubmit it, it will be 6 to 8 weeks before we will have access to funding and can finally officially start our project. That's it. Wow.
Could you say a little more about the promenade project at the bridge? What is that?
Yeah, so as part of our work in the last fiscal year, we had some small studies. And one of those studies was looking at Free Bridge Lane, which is kind of an underutilized roadway that connects Charlottesville Park to Free Bridge or 250 just east of the city line. There is a shared use path that is not super well kept on the west side of that roadway, and in our Penthouse master plan that had been completed a couple of years ago, there was a vision of transforming that into a green street. So making it kind of a linear park. And what we're going to be doing with the board's support, and if we can find funding to do it, is to make that transformation happen. So we would take motor vehicles off of most of that roadway and open it up entirely to bikes and pedestrians, make a couple of improvements to make it a safer, more friendly place to go. And that we're hoping to start that pilot program at the beginning of the next fiscal year.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Chambers?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off with our paint and plastics projects. So that's safe routes to school. That's our doctors mobility hubs, the orange spots on the ground you might have seen around West Main Street. Both of those programs are on pause right now because it's leaf season. Currently at peak leaf season, we don't pull out paint and plastic on the ground. So once we get past peak leaf season, we'll be head back out there, put more paint and plastic on the ground. We're also going to be looking at speeds within local residential neighborhoods to see if there's traffic calming that can add into that program as well. We are largely complete with our bike parking inventory. Tommy is now looking for places to put new bike parking throughout the city, and then working with vendors to purchase racks and corrals to put all over the city, largely on West Main and downtown for the time being, but we're also going to be looking to branch out from there. I'm working to wrap up some scopes to work to get started at the beginning of next year. That'll include our parking or on-street parking strategy. So figuring out what we do with residential permits, what we do with loading zones, handicap spots that are throughout neighborhoods, making sure that we're keeping up with them. As well as a restriping plan for West Main Street and a potential new alternative for a road diet on 5th Street Southwest. CAT is currently working through its transit strategic plan. We're about halfway through that right now. We've got some draft recommendations pulled together, but then we work with our capital plan or operating plan to make sure that those are feasible recommendations. Once we have those numbers pulled together, there will be another round of public engagement to make sure that those recommendations are palatable to the public. Alongside of that, CAT is working on its alternative fuel study. We're hoping to get that wrapped up in January. We have a visit that is being planned to another transit provider that has already gone through a similar study to see sort of what the outcomes of their study were and what their decision-making process was in that study. So excited to see if that come together in January as well. The city is finishing up its ADA transition plan. We have done an assessment of all of the sidewalks and right of way throughout the city at this point, so we know exactly what's broken. The next step is putting a dollar figure to all of those broken pieces and then figuring out what the prioritization will be for that. We'll be working through that in January, and then following that, we'll be finishing out our sidewalk priorities list. We should have that completed and published and ready for everybody, everyone's feedback, sometime in the spring.
Excellent, thank you. Julie, anything from the university? Okay, thank you.
Nothing more to add than what we
Okay.
already talked about.
All right, help me out here, Sandy, in terms of folks we have.
We have, it looks like FHWA is still available if they would like to make any updates or provide any updates at this time.
Hello, this is Steven. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, no, we didn't have any updates or anything. We do have a new person that started with us last week. I think she's still on the call page. She's a community planner as well. She's part of our professional development program. She just started, so she is. If she's still on the line, I'll let her introduce herself. She's been listening today, and I've been sort of sending her some information as y'all are talking, so she can start to learn some of the things that we do and the things we're listening to as well.
Yes, hi, I'm PhD Bold. It's great to be here, and I previously worked at a regional planning council in Florida, so I have some familiarity with the work that you're doing. It's great to be here.
It's very nice to have you, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Mr. Proctor, anything else for the group? Okay, Mr. Condor? We can't hear you if you're trying to tell us something. Okay.
Okay. We still don't have sound from you, Lee. We can see you through your camera, but we cannot hear you. Yeah.
All right, Lee, if you have any for the group, you can just email us. I think that's everything. Yeah, okay. Fantastic. So thank you very much, Sandy and staff, for pulling all this together and helping us get through another meeting. We have another chance for members of the public to speak. Is there anyone who wants to? Okay. I think then that we can adjourn it. Do I need a motion and
I think formally you usually do.
could I please have a motion? For adjournment?
Barring objection, you're adjourned.
Or your objection? Thank you very much. I'll get sticky there.